international and everything. Are you, Carrie and Kiran, are you okay with that?
Okay. Yep, let's do it.
Okay. So welcome everyone. Ty Austin, of course, is delighted to have you all join us at its very first Global in Appeal webinar, honestly, with two very powerful women in business. We have a large number of people registered. Some may be strolling in as they see fit and as they have time, but we will have our recording on the website. And I will announce that a little bit later and give you the website and everything. But first, if you're not familiar with Ty Austin, we are a membership-based nonprofit organization fostering entrepreneurship. And the way we do it is via mentorship, networking, education, incubation, and investing. We are the largest entrepreneurial organization in the world. So please check out our website. It's at the bottom of the screen here, as and when you get chance. And we also wanted to make sure that you know that Ty Austin also offers some focused key initiatives that might interest you particularly to get involved in. And some of them are women entrepreneurship, the young entrepreneurs, angel investors, and we also have joined our city of Austin for global entrepreneurial programs. So that's the newest one on our roster right now. Some housekeeping announcements. All webinar viewers are muted and will remain muted. Please submit your questions, type in your questions under the Q&A section on your screen. We may not be able to address all the seminar questions, all the webinar questions, given the time constraints. So this is the email ID that you want to note. And this is where you can send your additional questions if you feel that your answers were not satisfactorily answered, or if you have more comments or any other questions that come up, please use this email, webinars@austin.ty.org, and I will put that up again at the later part of the webinar. At this point, I would like to welcome Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, our chief guest speaker. What can I tell about Kiran? She is, everybody knows she's the executive chairperson of Biocon, based in Bangalore, India. And there is a long list of her accomplishments. And if I go through that right now, I'll take up the entire webinar time here, and I might embarrass her too. So I'm gonna just highlight some of those, that she has been a pioneer in the biopharmaceuticals industry. She has blazed a trail in Indian industry for entrepreneurs and women in particular. And this year, she was named Ernst & Young's World Entrepreneur of the Year. Congratulations again, Kiran.
Thank you.
Every year, at least one major publication will name her among the most influential people in the world. And I am not exaggerating that at all. We are very fortunate to have her with us today. And again, thank you. Really appreciate this. I also am delighted to have another trailblazer as our moderator today, Carrie Rupp. Carrie and I have known each other for a while now, a few years. Carrie is a general partner at True Wealth Ventures. It's an early stage venture capital fund investing in women-led businesses. And they particularly focus on consumer health and sustainability. And they are based in Austin, Texas. She's also an active startup coach, certified instructor for the National Science Foundation's Innovation Corps program, helps university-based teams to commercialize their science and technology research, and the list goes on and on and on. As an entrepreneur herself, she led her first accelerator and VC fund to among the top 10 in the US. Carrie has an MBA from Harvard and did her undergrad at Duke in biology. So Carrie and Kiran, we couldn't have found a better moderator for this webinar and have you two join hands here. Welcome both Kiran and Carrie. It is an honor and I'm proud to host you both. And Carrie, I'll turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Jayshree. And Kiran, thank you for being here. I echo what Jayshree said. It was really hard to figure out how to start the conversation because you have such an interesting background. And so I'm hoping that the people who are watching, if they haven't already gone and read about, your story, it's actually really interesting and lots of just lessons there, especially as a woman in India, navigating what you were able to do at the time because not every door was open to you. And so I just wanted to point out a couple quick things before we start the conversation, just that I think are particularly relevant, because today's conversation isn't just about your great experience, but it's really about the topic of compassionate capitalism, which is a term that you've coined that we want to really dig into and understand what it means, how you find it, how you enact it, how do you live it, that kind of thing. So I'll just note for everybody on the panel or on the webinar that Kiran's the first, if not, one of the first self-made billionaire women in India, which is pretty amazing, which means she really knows where she's coming from in terms of women entrepreneurship, in terms of building up something to value. And then we'll talk about all the different social and community good that she's been doing, both through the company and through various civic volunteering initiatives and philanthropic initiatives that she does. And so she's really living the values we're going to talk about today. I wanted to note also that she's joined the Giving Pledge, which pledges that at least half of her wealth will be dedicated to philanthropy as she goes forward. And so she's really a leader in all of this. But my favorite fun fact, which you'll find if you go research her background, is that she actually studied malting and brewing in college. As it turns out, my business partner, Sarah, in my venture capital fund, she and her husband actually own 512 Brewing here in Austin. So we're beer people too, which is great. But it's not, part of it is that she wasn't able to get a scholarship to med school. And as a woman in that era in India, that's the path she took. And you would think it would have been a diversion, but it actually led her on the path to ending up founding this biotech pharma company. And in fact, when I was reading about the kinds of initiatives the company does, fermentation is, one of the topics that's used, and yeast expression platforms are part of the things that this biopharma company does. And so you might think that malting and brewing is unrelated, but it's actually related, which is really cool. All right, so I'm going to dig right in, starting on the topic. Compassionate capitalism is this term that you've coined about the way that you should do business. And I think if we're going to have the whole conversation about it, of course, I kind of have to start by having you define it, explain what you mean by it, so that we can kind of dig into, well, then how do you do it? How do you practice it?
Thanks a lot, Carrie, and thanks a lot, Jayshree. And it's great to be here on this webinar. I have been a member of TIE in India many years ago, and I continue to make a lot of time for TIE because I think TIE does a great job for entrepreneurship the world over. So let me start by saying that, I look at two types of entrepreneurs. I mean, there are many types of entrepreneurs, but there are two essential types of entrepreneurs. There's one type of entrepreneur for whom it's about the money. It's about how, quickly can I get rich? How quickly can I create $1 billion company? And then there's another type of entrepreneur, which is myself, who says, how can I make a difference? How can I make big impact? What's the impact I can make and how big can it be? So, it's not about the money for me. Money always follows, but my main purpose is how can I make a difference? And at different parts of my entrepreneurial journey, I've thought about making a difference in different ways. So when I started my biotech journey about a little over 40 years ago, I started with developing enzymes for various types of industries. And like you said, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I never thought I'd start a company. And in fact, when I didn't get a job as a brewer in my own country because I was a woman, I almost tell people that because of a gender bias, I decided to become an entrepreneur. So I started my entrepreneurial journey way back in 1978, as you know, in partnership with an Irish company from whom I derived the name Biocon. And this Irish company was actually developing and marketing enzymes. Of course, there were enzymes for the brewing industry, which I was very familiar with. There was enzymes for the starch industry. There was enzymes for the fruit juice industry, for the paper and pulp industry, for the textile industry, and so on and so forth. And what really, sort of grabbed my attention and my interest was that this was a very cool technology because it was about replacing polluting chemical technologies with eco-friendly enzyme technologies. And I felt, hey, this is, such a good technology that I can make a big difference to environmental sustainability. Now, it wasn't a fashionable word. There was no focus on the environment. People didn't care about whether they polluted or not. Nobody even paid a price for polluting anything. So it was a very difficult, time to try and set up an enzymes business. But let me tell you, it was a very exciting business. I managed to, sort of sell my concept to many, many industries, and I was able to convert them into using enzymes. And so that's how I built my business. And so it was about really making impact, making a difference to the environment, because that was at a time when it was not about how big can I make my company. It was just about trying to translate my ideas into some kind of commercial opportunity. But then many years later, I got an opportunity to reinvent the business. And that's when I started biopharmaceuticals. And when I looked at biopharmaceuticals, I felt that I needed the same kind of sense of purpose. What's the difference can I make? And the difference I thought I could make was to provide affordable access to very expensive biologics or biopharmaceuticals. Because what I found was, Kerry, that when I ventured into biopharmaceuticals, I started with insulin. Okay. India was the diabetes capital of the world. Okay. We had the largest number of diabetics in the world. And we were importing all our insulin. And there was a very, at least a very sophisticated insulin at that time, which was in the late 90s, early 2000, which was recombinant human insulin. And very few Indian diabetics could afford it. Mm-hmm. They were using animal insulins those days.
Oh, interesting.
Because they could only afford animal insulin. Right. And very few people could afford the recombinant human insulin. So I looked at this kind of inequity and pretty unethical way of, marketing insulins to the most diabetic country in the world. And I thought to myself, well, I've got to make a difference. Let me see if I can develop a technology that can really deliver affordable insulins to a country like India. That's how I started my journey. Yeah. Now, I had a yeast, which I was using for making enzymes, certain enzymes. And I looked at that yeast and I said, hey, maybe this yeast could actually help me make a very affordable insulin. So I developed a technology based on that proprietary yeast. And I managed to actually produce a very cost-effective insulin. And today I am the lowest cost insulin producer in the world. I've just announced a 10 cents per day insulin at the WHO UNAIDS forum, saying that I really want to offer this insulin, and I'm not doing it for free. Okay, I still make profit at 10 cents. So I decided that I've just got to do that, and that's how I started on my journey for insulins. And then I saw the same happening with cancer drugs, because I found that there were these amazing new biopharmaceuticals which were, addressing a lot of unmet needs in cancer and almost curing many cancers. And yet, hardly anyone could afford those kind of drugs. So I said, let me make those drugs and make it more affordable. And those are called biosimilar biologics. And that's now, I think we are the most cost competitive and lowest cost producer of those drugs in the whole world. So that was my kind of impact making journey, my making a difference to patients around the world. That's what keeps me going. Yeah, my company is worth billions now because we do it well. But to me, that's not so important. The important thing is I'm making a difference, I'm creating value. And as I create value, I'm giving more and more to philanthropy because I've pledged 50% or more of my wealth to philanthropy. So the richer I get, the more I can give away.
Right. Amazing.
And what is even more exciting is that one of our drugs that I had developed a long time ago, we've repurposed it for COVID. And it is amazing. It's really saving lives. And that's what makes me even more excited.
That's awesome. Well, it's interesting when you talked about the two different types of entrepreneurs, and I'm going to generalize a little bit here. So I just want to state that I'm doing it, but I have data. So it turns out that when women come into increased wealth, they reinvest 2 times the amount of men of that increased wealth into programs that help their families and their communities, health, education, welfare, etc. And so it's pretty common for women to really combine their impact of what they're doing along with their, profit motives. And so I think that study came from Morgan Stanley that was doing work globally around the world to see that even in poorer countries where that increase in wealth is actually quite small, the women actually really took that increase in wealth and actually figured out how to reinvest it in, education and health and the really important things to keep their community going. Family first and then community, but it's still really powerful. So, you just have taken that and scaled it to $1 billion level, which is really impactful, which is awesome. And so one of the things I was going to talk about specifically to pharma companies is, of course, most pharma companies aren't known for thinking about affordable innovation. And in fact, what you hear mostly in the headlines about pharma companies is about price gouging, whether it's consumers complaining about it or even governments like going after it. And so given that that's the market in which you're playing, one of the questions is, how do you compete in that sector? When your peers are, so powerful because of all the revenue that they've generated from these really high prices, but also from a stock performance perspective. If these other companies are trying to maximize revenue from high prices and, your stock's on the exchange, how do people choose to invest in you? You noted one of the things already from the start is what I heard was that you actually looked at methodologies to produce these things at a lower cost, using a different methodology. So it's not just that you dropped the price, but it cost you the same, but you used different science actually to figure out a more affordable way to actually produce it. So you had more room for that. But I'd love to hear more about how you think about competing in this market, both, sort of in the marketplace, but also on the stock market with your peers who take a really pretty different approach to pricing drugs.
So the way I look at it is, look, we are in business, so I can't be sort of going about business as charity, right? But at the same time, we've developed a business model that allows us to really look at patients and give them that affordable access that they need. And of course, we have tiered pricing around the world because we know that certain parts of the world can afford higher pricing and certain parts cannot. So there is a little bit of, sort of cross-subsidizing our business across the world. But by and large, what we try to do is we try to basically add value to whatever we are doing. So there are some, the parts of the world where I will price higher. I'm trying to see what else can I do to justify and create that value for money, which those countries will pay for. For instance, recently, we just partnered and licensed a digital therapeutic product to manage diabetes, to manage insulin therapies. And that actually becomes a huge benefit to payers, to insurance companies, because when you actually manage diabetes better, the comorbidities also get mitigated. And so the eventual cost of healthcare is actually reduced. And so you're saving millions of dollars to the healthcare system. So how do you then position that to actually make a business case of it? So that actually allows us to actually generate more revenues, more profits. And that's a very smart way of doing it. So as a scientist, I've always believed that it's about the science. It's about technology. It's about developing IP and really creating that value from science and IP-led business strategies. That's what I believe that this business is all about. So if you ask me, yes, we do have very effective and efficient technologies that allow us to be globally competitive, but equally, I think we also believe in ensuring that we get the best value for our products.
Yeah, it makes sense. So as you think about it as a company, obviously, you were the founder and you're now the executive chairperson. And so you can embody these values and hopefully, kind of indoctrinate them into the culture below you. But as the company gets big, I think I read it was like, 9,000 or more employees at this point. You can't just have a passion and then hope that 9,000 people agree with you and know how to balance the trade-off between revenue and high profit and sort of social good. So as you were growing the company, and especially now when it's a big company, how do you actually indoctrinate this concept of compassionate capitalism into the company? So have you stated explicit values that you're going to balance, and how is the decision-making happen to decide how you trade those things off? How does that play out in practice within your company?
So I think it's very important for companies to have values. And I think those values have to be instilled in a very strong way. So if this is the DNA of the company, if the whole company has been founded on affordable access, then, that is ingrained in the people. So they know that we have to really focus on being cost competitive. We have to focus on really making this, whatever we do, it's for the patients. And we must make sure that patients all over the world can have access to these life-saving medications. See, we are in the business of essential and life-saving drugs. And when you know that you don't want to deprive or deny any patient who needs it. So how do you do it? So first you almost look at the poorest of patients in any part of the world and say, if they need that drug, how are they going to get it? So the first thing you have to make sure is that the government plays its role if it has to. And if the government is not playing its role, then how do you provide that access to that patient who needs it? So do you have a compassionate care program? What do you do? So you need to look at your target customer, who's your real patient, who's your patient really. The patient matters. So I think if you can get people to understand that it's the patients, it's the payers, it's the healthcare system, it's about making difference to global healthcare. I think that's the ethos and the DNA of the company and the values of the company, which are instilled into everyone. And I'll be very, I'm very pleased that I set up this new company called Biocon Biologics, which is at the moment a subsidiary of Biocon. But we do hope to take it public very soon. And the CEO of that company is a remarkable woman. She's a German woman called Christiane Hammerscher, whom I just hired, from one of the large big pharma companies a year ago. And she believes in the same ethos. It's for her, it's the patients coming first. It's about serving patients in different parts of the world. It is about being cost competitive. It is about affordable access. So, when you choose people, you've got to make sure that they believe in what you're talking about, that, they share your goals and your ambitions and your aspirations of making a difference to global healthcare.
And you have to get the hiring managers below them, to take that same thing and actually use it in their hiring practices and below them in order to make sure that stays.
Well, it has a natural osmotic flow, because once the leadership believes in that, and once you have people across the organization realizing that they're doing such a lot of good for society, I think it has a multiplier effect and people love it. I don't think you'll ever find people not believing and engaging in something that's for the greater good of society.
I agree. And I think when you tell that story, of course, at the big picture, it feels so good. It's like, okay, great. We're going to reach even the, poorest people with these life-saving drugs. Of course you would do that. Why doesn't everybody do that? It seems so simple, but of course it becomes much more complicated in practice. And I was wondering if you could maybe point to an example of a situation where, okay, at a high level, it was clear what the greater good was, but that in the day-to-day practice that, the conflict existed of how do I trade off between maximizing shareholder value and, you know, sort of continuing to care about my constituents who are the patients or the community or the employees or the you talked about, you know, earlier on, the environment. You know, when a company is trying to trade off between all of those factors, how do you navigate that in practice? Or how do you sort of set the benchmarks for, you know, how much you lean this way versus how much you lean this way in that conversation?
You know, it's interesting, but you know, my investors have believed in what I'm doing. And let me tell you, I enjoy one of the highest PE multiples in our industry. At the moment, I'm trading at the highest multiple in the pharmaceutical industry in our country, because they believe that I have a huge opportunity, a huge future, and I'm extremely differentiated in what I'm doing. Nobody else is coming close to what I'm doing. So they realize that I'm a very unique offering. So I think that's what I think appeals to investors.
Yeah.
They don't see too much competition around and they feel, hey, what is she doing that is so unique and other people can't copy it? So there's something very unique and very proprietary about what Biocon is doing. And therefore, I think a lot of investors attribute that value. And let me tell you, I don't think I have a problem of creating shareholder value, because they believe in what I'm doing, they're seeing the value accretion, and they are not seeing companies like ours to invest in.
Yep.
So I'm a very unique stock offering.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting, you know,
I would say to most entrepreneurs, don't worry about, you know, just making sure that, you know, all the time you're talking about your shareholders and shareholder value. Come on, you know, be true to what you're doing. Be true to your purpose. And I think you'll get your investors also engaged with you. Your investors will buy into you. And I think if they realize what you're onto is something really good and big, I think they'll invest in you and they actually add value to what you're doing. And as I said, my shareholders, yes, for a long time, maybe they were a bit concerned that I was investing so much in R&D. And they kept kind of taunting me saying, are you doing the right thing? You're taking too much risk. I said, yes, I'm taking a lot of risk, but I'm debt free. I can afford to take that risk. But then finally that risk paid off, right? And then they all said, wow, you took the right risk, you managed the risk, and you really delivered on that risk. So when you keep delivering, I think shareholders buy into you more, they believe you more, and they are willing to then value you much more.
Yeah, there's a little chicken egg at the beginning though for the, you know, early entrepreneurs. The good news is, of course, there's been now data that proves that you don't have to give up financial return for social return. And in fact, the thesis of our fund, for example, is that we will make more money by investing in companies that improve human and environmental health, because those companies are the target acquisitions for the big companies who are getting demand from their consumers for cleaner and greener solutions. And so frankly, it can actually be more powerful, as you're seeing with your high PE ratio, to invest in things that are doing good, because holistically, it's actually more sustainable for the long term.
And I also believe that we're coming into a situation, I think COVID has shown you that there is a huge amount of inequity in the world, right? I mean, I was just reading a very, very interesting piece written by a very good friend of mine in New York, who's a wonderful economist, you know, Ruchir Sharma. He wrote a very interesting article about, you know, are we failing capitalism? Because he feels that, you know, the kind of capitalism we've created is not the kind of capitalism that will basically make the world grow into an equitable place. Because he says what we're doing now is we're in this COVID crisis, the furloughs and the bailouts are actually going to large corporations that don't bail out, right? They should be resilient enough to withstand any of these challenges. But we keep, you know, mollycoddling them and telling them, okay, don't worry, nothing will happen, we'll give you that money. And actually, it's the ones who need help are the smaller companies. Yep. They are the ones who need support. The big guys don't need support. But we've got so used to this, it's too big to fail kind of syndrome, which I think is very wrong. And I think these big boys need to stand on their own. It doesn't matter if they have to be bashed around a bit by big calamities, but they need to know how to pick themselves up.
I mean, in a market economy, capitalism says, you know, supply demand should work this out, and we can.
Absolutely. You don't want to all the time keep bailing them out. It's the small guys who really start perishing. and you need to support them. You want to have, as you said, you need a whole bunch of small, innovative companies that can actually be the supply chain of the bigger guys, right? And that's how this whole economic capitalist ecosystem actually should work. That's the perpetual machine that you need to create. But if you're only going to focus on the big guys and don't worry about the small guys, then you're going to have this huge disconnect between wealth creation only being, sort of pivoted into this small group of people, and the rest of them are much below that. So you want there to be more wealth creation and wealth sharing. But the only way to do it is to make sure that you don't keep favoring the big guys.
Yeah. So this is maybe a good conversation about sort of where capitalism and the market economy kind of works on its own and where it needs a boost. And, some of these small companies just need some help to stay viable and then to grow during this time. It sort of reminds me also of the scenario of like where capitalism can create social change, like what you're doing literally with affordable drug prices, but where you have to turn to philanthropic efforts in order to solve some things that capitalism can't. And so I'd love to understand, I know you started a foundation at Biocon that's focused on health and education and infrastructure. And how do you sort of decide which things your company can solve for by doing the right thing in the way it does business versus which things your foundation, sort of wants to go focus on using, company assets in some capacity to do that? And then, if you're open to talking about this, where you personally decide to do philanthropic things and sort of which is the right tool for which of those scenarios and how do you trade those off?
So the good thing in India is that the government mandates that you have to allocate at least 2% of your profits to corporate social responsibility. Mm-hmm. So, that's a very good way of directing some of your profits towards social improvement or social development. So what we've done is that this corporate social responsibility is channeled through the Biocon Foundation, mm-hmm. which focuses on a few areas that we believe we can actually make an impact on. And of course, part of it is primary healthcare, because we believe that for a country like India, for any country for that matter, I mean, COVID has shown the weaknesses in our healthcare systems. Even America, a country like America has shown that it has a broken healthcare system because you don't have a strong primary healthcare network, right? Mm-hmm. And we decided that that was the starting point for us in India, that you need a very strong and robust primary healthcare center. And what we decided to do was, we said, let's leapfrog, because although there are primary health centers, they are very dysfunctional. So how do you make them functional? And we thought, let's use technology. So we started making them as digital primary health centers, where we would actually use technology to capture all the health data, health records for every single person visiting that primary health center. And then using technology basically to store the diagnostic measurements that were coming out. And then you could actually start mapping the health profile of that small town or village or district or whatever it is. And you could almost create a sort of a heat map of different kinds of, the disease profile of that area. And you could help then the government to plan the management of that healthcare system through drug procurement, through the tertiary care system, the secondary care system. What is, can you downstage health, the patients? Otherwise, what used to happen was anyone feeling ill would always end up at the hospitals. Mm-hmm. So you triage. So if you can use a primary healthcare center to triage, you will only send those who really need to go to the hospitals to go there. And that way you save money and so on and so forth. So we decided to invest in these digital healthcare centers, which have become very, very successful, I must tell you.
And did you actually help in instituting like what the strategy was going to be, et cetera? Or did you just decide this is the place where we want to invest the funding?
No. Of course, you have to work with the government. You can't do it on your own.
Right.
So basically talked to the government and said, look, this is what we want to do. Why don't you just give us 25 or 50 of your, depending on which state we are in. India has so many state governments. So we went to different state governments and said, why don't you just give us 20 or 10 or 20 or 30 primary healthcare centers that we can adopt. And we can then help you to, help to integrate these primary health centers into your main healthcare system. So that's how we worked with governments, and it's become very, very successful. The governments are very appreciative of this.
Yes.
Then what we did was education was another very important thing. So we found that, for instance, Bangalore is the software capital of the world.
Yep.
And we felt that a lot of the rural kids didn't have a very good math understanding. They needed to have, they needed to understand mathematics in order to get into the colleges that could teach them computer science. And it so happened that the head of the foundation was a mathematics teacher. And she had come up with these very interesting set of textbooks to teach math. So, it was a fun math. It was a fun way of teaching math to kids.
Yeah.
So we decided we started off with producing a whole bunch of those textbooks. I'm talking about many years ago.
Yeah.
And it's of course on an online format. So that became a big investment for us to give it to all the government schools and all the schools in rural India, which could benefit from this. Then we partnered with another NGO to basically, it's a lab on wheels. So this laboratory goes from village to village, educating kids with scientific experiments. Very nice model they have. So we supported that. And then of course, we believed a lot in cleaning up our water bodies, which are so polluted. Many of our water bodies around our factories are very badly polluted by either industrial waste or sewage. So we said, let's clean them up and make them into really, really healthy water bodies, which support fish and, birds and things like that. And we've done a great job. We've actually rescued quite a few of those lakes. And then we've done things like afforestation projects and things like that. So there's an environmental side to it. There's education, there's healthcare. And then on my personal philanthropy, I also have a personal philanthropy. I do a lot I built a cancer hospital, for instance. I give a lot of educational chairs all over the world. I've given chairs to MIT, to Sloan Kettering, to Glasgow University, and of course, a lot of universities in India.
Yeah.
I invested in a new university called Kriya University in Chennai. So I do a lot for education because I really think but that's my personal philanthropy.
Well, right. And I was trying to understand sort of, you've got your personal missions, and then the business's corporate responsibility missions that tie maybe both to what you do as a company in terms of healthcare, but also to the environment in which your company operates and where your employees and your patients live, right? And trying to figure out what are the initiatives.
So it's very clear what I do with the company's corporate social responsibilities in its immediate communities and society. My personal philanthropy is much larger.
Right.
It's global, right?
Yep.
So the company's philosophy, a company's, corporate social responsibility is very local. My philanthropic mission is very global. So maybe that will give you some idea.
Yeah.
So we also adopted the local metro station. They're just setting up a metro line that will come next to our company. And so the government said, could you adopt this metro station and build it for us? And I said, sure. So I do everything very local as far as the company is concerned. But on my personal front, I do it globally.
Makes sense. There was also an initiative that I read about that you're involved in that I'm going to pronounce incorrectly, so I apologize, but it's Arogya Raksha Yojana. It's a disease.
Well, that's the same health insurance, micro health insurance, which was part of the primary healthcare center initiative that we started.
Got it, okay.
We started the micro health insurance program because it was a very clever program. But the government then picked it up and they instituted their own government insurance program, which mimicked this. So we didn't then have a role to play. So we ran this for a long time, but then morphed it into the government.
Well, that's great. Then it was able to scale after you helped kind of create it. One of the things I read about, so obviously you're providing low cost drugs there, at a negligible profit, which is great. But I also read about a subsidized convenience pricing plan where the wealthy people pay more in order to allow the, less fortunate people to pay less. And I was curious, I don't know if you were involved in sort of that
I don't
component
think
of it.
that's not really the way it works.
Okay, tell me how it works.
No, that's not the way it works. What we do is, it's a very small, it's a micro premium that people pay every month.
Yeah.
So unlike a normal insurance premium which you pay per year, so what we do is we tell these people you pay it every month because we realize you can't pay one big lump sum.
Yeah.
That's how it worked. So they paid a small premium every month, but it covered them for the year. And they could actually have free cashless hospitalization up to a certain level. And we used to do checkups. We used to do a lot of health awareness building, women's health, diabetes, heart disease, communicable diseases. So we used to give a lot of those. We do that in all our primary health centers. Immunization programs, we would run it for the government.
Great. And it's a good example, actually, of where you can have an innovation around a business model, right? So insurance was unaffordable to them as a big lump sum cash payment. So you don't have to change the insurance, maybe. You just need to change how the people can opt into it and pay into it at this, small premium, regularly kind of model. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs think it has to be the science or the product, but sometimes it can literally be the approach you take that's the innovation.
And the business model, yes.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about, you talked about how investors are really valuing the trade-offs that you're making and that you are doing something sustainable for the greater good. And as consumers are choosing who they want to do business with when they have a choice, maybe you don't get to choose which drugs you're prescribed, but even when they're investing their own personal assets, so not just investors that are institutional, but personal investors, how should they or how could they navigate knowing which companies are good to invest in? Like, do you, do you publish how you tie into the UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example, or the IRIS Plus metrics by the Global Impact Investing Network? Are those, do you have recommendations for people about how to know, is this a company that I align not only with their profits, but with their impact values? Do you have any recommendations for people on that?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to basically support, or align with the SDGs, because that's so important. All those sustainable development goals are really, really so key for our future. So whether it's gender equity, whether it's environment, or whether it's health equity, or, various parts of the sustainability development goals are something that everybody subscribes to and aligns with. The second thing is ESG has become an important part of any business and every business. And I think you'll be judged by that. I think it's no longer about how much money you make, but it's about how you spend that money, how you invest that money, and how you invest in your people and your business that can make better social impact. I think that is a real recognition today. You also want to invest in companies that are ethical, companies that do things properly, do things with a greater purpose in mind. I think, those things matter today. It's not about motherhood statements. It's really about companies that really are sincere about what they want to do in a way that actually helps society to develop in a better way.
Yeah, and I think what will be helpful is how people start to learn how they can differentiate between the motherhood and apple pie, big statements that people make, but also being able to measure how people actually move the needle on those.
You have to walk the talk. You have to walk the talk. I can say what I want, but if people really find that I don't mean what I say, I think you can be found out very easily. A lot of big pharma has this problem because, you just talked about price gouging. So on one side, it's all about the patients. It's all about healthcare. Oh, we are saving the world. But then on the other hand, we don't care about those who can't afford our drugs.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's the question you'll ask. And I still remember I even heard one of the CEOs of a big pharma many years ago make this outrageous statement, which he then had to withdraw and apologize for, because someone said, why are you charging so much to these poorer countries? I mean, why they can't afford it? And he said, I don't make drugs for the poor in the world. And he had to then withdraw his statement because that was a horrible thing to say.
Yeah. But
right?
it's telling when
You
these
make
people
drugs
say,
for patients. You don't make drugs for profits. And that's the problem. So I personally believe patients come first, profits will follow. For many companies, it's profits first and then the patients. And that's what is wrong with the world.
yeah. So as we think about the listeners who are here today hearing about this, do you have any specific recommendations around actions they can take to start taking this concept of compassionate, capitalism into their own lives? I guess both as business leaders, but also as, investors or consumers. How do they actually kind of indoctrinate this concept into what they're doing?
I think it's a very individualistic thing, Kerry, because, there are people for whom they look at this saying, oh, this is all rubbish, come on, it's about the money. Let's not fool around. Let's not be hypocrites. For me, money is important, okay? I'm not going to start a business that doesn't make money.
The word capitalism is in there, yeah.
No, but capitalism is not that.
Right.
They keep thinking about capitalism is about the money, capitalism is about making money, capitalism is about competing and and nudging out everybody. That's not capitalism. Capitalism is making good use of capital. Capitalism is turning around that capital and generating more wealth. That's all it is. It doesn't mean that you do things in a wrong way. It doesn't mean that money at any cost. So I just think people need to understand that. And I think people also need to understand that money has to be made in a good way. Money has to be made with patience. Don't be in a hurry to make money, because the moment you want to make money in a hurry, you will take shortcuts. You will make compromises, and then you will do the wrong things. That's why I've never been in a hurry to make money. I've taken my own sweet time. I've built a sustainable model. Now it's money that's really sort of driving my business and helping me to grow. I'm, very low debt company, and I've always been that way. And that's the way I believe in. It's about doing good and doing it patiently and doing it sustainably.
But I think for people to do that, because it can be hard when you're the struggling, company that's early and doesn't have a lot of money, it can be hard maybe sometimes to not take that like low hanging fruit of revenue. And so making sure that you've indoctrinated both in yourself and in your culture, what your values are, so that you don't stray from that mission, that it's actually core to what you do, right? So
I've been through my entrepreneurial journey where I really struggled a lot for the first 10 years. I wasn't I couldn't afford lots of things, okay? But, when it started working, I think it was well worth that struggle.
Yep. And so I think people need to keep that eye on the long-term prize, right? So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to shift to one last question that is going to be really important to me, given that I have a fund focused on women, and then take a couple audience questions. So obviously, because I'm focused on women, and we know, unfortunately, that, at least in the early stage of, companies founding, venture capital is still only about, 2 to 3% of that goes to women. I'd love to get your thoughts on, any thoughts on why that is and what women can do about it, but really just what advice do you have specifically for women entrepreneurs? And as a woman in STEM, who studied science both in, your early days and, sort of continued on through that, just any specific advice for women entrepreneurs and women in STEM?
Well, the first thing I want to say to all women is that it's a very exciting journey to take an idea to the market. It is not an easy journey. It's a very challenging journey, but I think it's a very self-fulfilling journey, because you discover yourself, you gain confidence, you have a lot of self-confidence, and you end up believing in yourself a lot more. And I think that's the journey that you should be looking at, okay? Secondly, I think for STEM, I just want to tell women in STEM that today is the most opportune time for anyone in STEM to start a business, because there are so many opportunities that COVID has created. In fact, COVID has created a lot of opportunities all across the board, right? So whether it's about how we are using this video conferencing platform, how we do online buying, or how products are getting created for making you safe during COVID. Fashion statements are being made with masks. Those fashion statements will be even made by PPEs and so on and so forth, But I just think that women in opportunity. I know so many women in India who were in STEM and who started developing diagnostic kits for COVID. And most of those kits, in fact, I'm delighted to say, were started by either women founders or women who are in the leadership team or co-founders. So that's happened in a big way. Then, of course, vaccines have become a very important area for development. There's so much going in STEM today because of COVID. It's opened up a plethora of opportunities in infectious diseases. Nobody bothered about infectious diseases.
Mm-hmm.
There's again a refocus on infectious diseases and communicable diseases and vaccines for everything. Now everyone's scared that when's the next virus going to break out? And we've got over coronaviruses. There's going to be some other virus that's going to surprise us. So there's going to be a lot of vigilance on zoonotic viruses from now onwards. And there's so much genetic sequencing opportunities for companies who just want to keep repertoires of viruses and their genetics so that you can quickly develop a vaccine. So you can almost come up with a pro-vaccine that if there is any outbreak, you can license it and say, hey, you can do this, you can produce this vaccine in a month.
So you're really looking for, opportunities in the face of change, which is a great time to start businesses, really. When there's been a major structural shift, it creates new pains and new opportunities for gain.
Yeah, I mean, a crisis always creates an opportunity. As they say, never waste a crisis.
You're an optimist. I like it. Okay, so I'll take a couple audience questions. One is, there's sort of two around compassionate capitalism, where I think they want, the audience members want a little bit more detail around. Compassionate capitalism needs a culture change across an organization. What are one or two things you can do to affect this change? So you and I talked at the beginning about how you can start your company with this culture and hire with this culture. But let's say you're already an established company and you're looking to start to really get the company to evolve, to understand that this is really the way of doing business. What would you maybe do differently in terms of things the company could do to start indoctrinating that?
So that's a leadership challenge. If you really believe in it, well, you have to build that culture. So that's a leadership challenge. There are no real, simple ways of doing it. I had the prerogative of starting my company with that culture.
Yeah.
If I had to do it, all from start, I mean, if I had to inherit a company that didn't have that culture, I personally believe that, I would actually challenge myself saying, how do I get people to buy into what I want to do? And so it's a leadership challenge. So you have
showing them what the benefits are, to them, to the community, etc.
You have to get their buy-in. Because first you have to really believe in it. Okay, there's no point just doing it because it's the nice thing to do. You believe in it.
Well, and I find one of the things that can be really powerful in both internalizing something and convincing people is data, right? So showing the impact of how you can do good and do well, showing, the financial return, but also
it's about walking the talk. You have to believe in it and you have to walk the talk, and you have to be, as you say, you have to have the data to show that it's good, and then get the buy-in of all your team.
Yep. And then the other question I have, just because Ty is our host today, is how can Ty Austin and Ty Global help in promoting women's entrepreneurship in STEM fields around the world and in India? Like, what can organizations like this do to help facilitate that? We know that India still has a challenge of having enough women in the C-level roles. What will it take to change that? Where do you see that these kinds of organizations can help, move the needle on those factors?
Kerry, you and I know that there's a huge amount of focus on diversity, and I think every organization is trying very hard to improve its diversity ratio. And I think women actually have a huge opportunity to really lead the way. I can tell you that in my own organization, where I used to keep on I remember when I was building the organization, I said, I want this to be a company where every woman scientist wants to come and work. And I did have a very large number of women scientists hired in my research laboratories. And even today, I have a very high percentage of women scientists working in my laboratory. When I look across the board, maybe the percentage drops because women are not sort of inducted into many other types of jobs. But now that I'm refocusing on diversity, it's interesting how many women I can find in leadership roles, and I'm encouraging that. So I think it is about corporations paying a lot of attention to women in leadership roles. It's about women themselves wanting to develop themselves and take on leadership roles. And it's about women wanting to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, at least in the US, women start businesses at 2 times the rate of men, which is great. I don't know what the statistics are like in India, but I would imagine, just knowing a lot of industrious Indian women, it's the same. It's about getting them access to the resources and the networks and the capital to be able to scale those into big businesses. That's sort of still lacking. So that's, I think, where I can see, being able to really bring it to the next level. So I'm going to thank you so much for taking the time to engage with this audience here. I know everyone was really thrilled to have access to you. You've had such an interesting career, and we love the way you're doing business. So thank you for your time. I know Jayshree wants to wrap up a little bit to say thank you, and also to talk about some upcoming Thai events. So I will turn it back over to her. You're on mute, Jayshree, just so you know.
Thank you, Carrie. Really appreciate it. I'm going to go on my screen share.
Okay. You're mute, I think, Jayshree.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. I'm going to go back on my screen share. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I guess this conversation could go longer. Very, very informative and very eye-opening for sure. And I hope the viewers today have been able to take away important insights and then get encouraged by Kiran and Carrie here. Thank you so much. Our deepest gratitude to Kiran again. Thank you, Kiran. And Carrie, your support to me, it's incredible, always. And Ty Austin, of course, has been really appreciative of you. Thank you so much. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, please send to webinars@austin.thai.org. A recording, as I mentioned earlier, will be posted of this webinar on our website under the past events pages, and it should be posted by end of tomorrow, please. Our next webinar for everybody is on August 18th. And again, this is another global event that we are bringing to you. We are going to have Philip Sykes, the founder of the British School of Etiquette, joining in from the UK. And he will talk to us about the power of etiquette and how we can lubricate business using that power of etiquette. So this is a very novel topic that Ty Austin is bringing to you. So I hope to see you, everybody there. And it can be a very useful topic today and learning today in business world and society in general, because this will help you maximize your image and career by representing and presenting the best of you. So please join us. And thank you all for attending. And thank you, Kiran and Carrie.
I just want to make one statement, Jayshree. There was a question that somebody asked me saying, will India only make, sort of Me Too pharmaceuticals like small molecules?
Ah, yes.
And I want to tell them that I'm coming out with a big blockbuster drug, which I hope I can prove in COVID-19. I've licensed to a US company, and I think together we're going to make it into a big product.
Awesome. We look forward to that. We'll wait to hear about that. And Kiran,
so this is going to be a big blockbuster out of India for the world.
Right. And you know what? Ty Austin will help you launch it and publicize it. We are in with you, so let us know. Absolutely. Have Ganesan or anybody send it to me as soon as you have anything.
No. Well, I mean, this is a serious effort, so it's not something that I can just...
No. Whenever that happens, we're here.
Yeah, but I'm sure there will be an opportunity to share it with you at some stage.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. Bye.